It went right down to the wire in Abu Dhabi for second in the constructors' standings, as the teams and drivers ended up fighting for position, and Leclerc even let Perez through in efforts to take second in the constructors' standings. But it was Verstappen once again who comfortably led the way to win his 19th race of the season. There's a lot to talk about, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Verstappen caps off the perfect season with yet another win. Max Verstappen has undoubtedly had the strongest season of any driver in Formula 1 history. He's been utterly dominant in 2023 and has taken his 19th race win at the final round of the year. This weekend, Red Bull were on the back foot going into qualifying, as the team seemed to be finding it difficult to get their car set up in the right way, and they even made a significant rear suspension setup change going into qualifying. But it was a brilliant lap from Verstappen to secure another pole position this season, showing that it is Verstappen that makes the difference when it comes to delivering that all-important lap time. Once he was on pole position, Verstappen delivered from the outset. He was comfortably out at the front despite Leclerc keeping close and challenging to take the lead on the opening lap. And then quickly Verstappen built his lead over second place to ensure the Ferrari driver couldn't have the DRS advantage once it was activated. From that point, it looked comfortable for the world champion, as he only dropped behind drivers due to the strategy, as the likes of Tsunoda, Stroll and Sainz were out in front. Once the first round of pit stops took place, Verstappen quickly went back to the front and then maintained his lead through the rest of the Grand Prix, as he was on track to achieve 1,000 laps led over the course of the season, which is an unbelievable achievement for any driver over the course of a 22-race year. It's been a truly remarkable season for Verstappen, and one that will go down in the history books. Once again, Verstappen has also so much capacity in the car that he was keeping an eye on how Sergio Perez was getting on behind him to ensure he could offer his teammate the first pit stop, which would help the Mexican driver's race. It ended up being a comfortable win for Verstappen, as he took 19 wins in the 22-race year. It's been an unbelievable year for the driver, so it's a purple box for this race in Abu Dhabi and his season as a whole. Mercedes hold on to take second in the Constructors' Championship. This whole week there have been comments from fans to question whether Mercedes or Ferrari would even want to finish second in the Constructors' Championship, as they might gain extra prize money and offer extra bonuses for the team members, but would lose out in terms of wind tunnel and CFD testing time as a result. I think this is nonsense, and both teams seem to show up to Abu Dhabi with a clear desire to take second in the Constructors' Championship. Both teams struggled with one driver and performed relatively well with the other in qualifying, as Leclerc took Ferrari to the front row and Russell took 4th in his Mercedes, while Hamilton went out in Q2 and Sainz dropped out in Q1. The fact that the teams wouldn't have 2 drivers in the mix at the front meant it was going to be an interesting battle in the race, where early on the Ferraris would have an advantage and be forecast to overtake Mercedes for second in the Constructors. But the race would be about the recovery of Hamilton and Sainz, as well as which of the frontrunners would be able to finish higher up the order. Early on, Leclerc did what he could to fight for the lead and managed the race well in second position from there. But Russell did excellently to overtake Piastri on track and then leapfrogged the McLaren of Norris in the pits after the British driver had a slow pit stop. This meant that the Mercedes team were doing enough to maintain their advantage over Ferrari and ensure they took the accolade with Russell on track to secure just his second podium of the 2023 season. The race was an incredibly tactical one for Russell and Leclerc, as both drivers were keen to learn what they could from their teams regarding their position in the championship overall. It was so clear that it meant a lot to the drivers to secure second in the Constructors' standings, and so it was even tactical from Leclerc at the end, as he let Perez by and tried to back up Russell in attempts to end up second, with Russell in 4th. It was amazing to see Leclerc think like that whilst driving his Ferrari at high speed, but in the end the gap was decided by just 3 points. On the whole, it was a brilliant battle for the Constructors' Championship, and it was great to see the drivers and teams battling it down to the final lap. So it's a green box for Mercedes for getting it over the line following an incredibly competitive season to be the second fastest team. If only the 2023 season was fought on a Saturday. The qualifying event in Abu Dhabi was excellent and actually unbelievably close. Earlier this year in Austria, the drivers were split in Q1 by under a second. The same happened in Abu Dhabi, with all the drivers split by 0.999 seconds, albeit with Logan Sargent's lap time deleted, though the Williams driver would have been within that time based on the time that he actually set. To be within a second with the longer lap time than in Austria shows how close these cars can be in certain conditions. The top 14 drivers in Q1 were spread over just 0.4 of a second, which is a huge achievement for Formula 1 and shows how close these cars are in terms of one lap pace. Admittedly, the Red Bull team have stopped developing their car for the latter half of the year, instead focusing on 2024. This means that the other teams have taken the opportunity to catch up with the top team in the sport. But either way, it's great to see the teams be so close over a single lap, especially in a season where Red Bull has been so dominant. Of course, in the race, the gaps between the teams became quite clear again, especially with Red Bull cantering off into the distance with Max Verstappen. This was a bit of a shame, and to be honest, I don't expect the beginning of next season to be this close. But I hope that this is a sign that there may be hope for the teams to start to bridge the gap to the top team in the sport at some point in the next 12 months. The race was a bit disappointing, with field spread meaning the drivers tended to lose time to each other over the course of the Grand Prix, and this led to fewer overtakes. Even with drivers out of position though, the typically quicker cars struggled to make moves work when trying to get past the backmarkers on the grid. The likes of Sergio Perez and Lewis Hamilton were stuck behind typically slower cars early on, and this was critical for the Constructors' Championship, with Mercedes projected to be behind Ferrari early on in the race. This shows that the pace differential between the front runners and the midfield teams wasn't big enough for the drivers to make as many overtakes stick, but it also shows how difficult overtaking is around the Abu Dhabi track. The reprofiling of the circuit last year has made it better, but really it's still a challenge for the drivers to overtake. On the whole, it was great to see the cars be so close in qualifying, and that deserves a green box, but it's a shame that this didn't lead to a spectacular Grand Prix. Perez uses strategy to make up positions. Sergio Perez started the race down in 9th after a disappointing Q3, after he had lap time deleted in the final qualifying session. This meant that he would have a difficult challenge to make up the positions on Sunday evening in Abu Dhabi. But it was Perez that was the driver that made it work, going long on the second stint to ensure that he could race in clear air and make up some positions from that perspective. It was a good strategy from Red Bull this weekend, and Perez did a good job to make the overtakes work early on and then be quick towards the end of the race as well. However, while he did make up several positions and had a tyre advantage towards the end of the race, the Mexican driver made a clumsy move on Norris where he was deemed to have caused a collision. For me, it was clearly Perez who was more at fault, but equally it could have been a racing incident in my opinion as well. It was a close one, but the subsequent 5-second penalty made it interesting as Perez was all of a sudden very important when it came to the Ferrari versus Mercedes Constructors' Championship battle. It was a disappointing end to what was otherwise a brilliant race for Perez, and for me, this sums up Perez's season. He was good in the races, but he was a step behind on Saturday, which made each weekend more difficult and made Verstappen's job of winning the championship that bit easier. For me, it's an amber box for Perez this weekend. He was still good in the race if it wasn't for that disappointing move on Norris, and it could have been avoided if he'd have just been better in qualifying and not gone off the track. Tsunoda's counter strategy means he even led the race. Yuki Tsunoda's support for Franz Tost was clear this weekend as he ran tributes for his team boss that would be leaving the team at the end of the year, having been the second longest serving team principal on the grid. Tsunoda had his best career qualifying in Abu Dhabi as he put his AlphaTauri car on 6th on the grid, which shows just how well the team have done to develop that car through the season, and they've come a long way from the team that has spent the majority of the year at the bottom of the standings. But the team opted to go for a differential strategy with the Japanese driver, with Tsunoda protecting his medium tyres and keeping them going for several laps extra, as he actually ended up with the longest first stint of any driver despite being on the softer compound compared to some others. It was a brilliant opening stint for the driver as he even led the race towards the end of that stint, but it was a bold move to go for a one-stop strategy as he attempted to do enough for the team to catch up to Williams, which was an unlikely outcome anyway. Tsunoda was the driver who made the one-stop work and held on to 8th position in the end, which was good, but the team still ended up 3 points behind Williams in the constructors' standings. This was a shame to see, but the team left themselves with a lot to achieve if they wanted to catch their rivals based on how late their upgrades came this year. Tsunoda's 2023 season has been excellent, and this result was a great way to finish it off as he's comprehensively beaten his teammates throughout the season. It was a daring approach to go for the one-stop, and he did the job well, and so Tsunoda clearly deserves a green box for this weekend. It's not been the most exciting season, but it's been a record-breaking one for Max Verstappen, and it's been impressive to watch a driver be quite so dominant over the course of the 2023 season. But let's hope next year is a bit more competitive.